Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today we have the second batch of reviewed cards from the Boomsday Project expansion. There aren't many, but they're very exciting. It's these first few cards that are really telling on what kind of expansion we're going to get. Clarification on the mechanics and some very interesting synergies is what we have for you guys. Blizzard made a video in which they explained the magnetic mechanic at length. In this video, they revealed 4 more cards from the Boomsday Project expansion, and with the new perspective on the magnetic mechanic, there are some great things that can be done. So, first off, we got Ziliax, a legendary mech. It's neutral. It's got that magnetic. It's got Divine Shield, Taunt, Lifesteal, Rush. So basically the full package. It's missing that charge and I guess the Wind Fury compared to AKIR, but it's still good enough if you're running like Corpse Takers. Another card to consider if you short on mechs. Corpse Taker is a friend of Ziliax, it seems. Now, the magnetic mechanic, if you didn't catch it, the idea is when you have a mech, it's only mech, it's a tribal mechanic. When you have a mech in play and you're holding a minion with magnetic, you can magnetize the minion in your hand to the one on the board, adding its stats, adding its abilities, and it can attack right away and stuff. So, Ziliax gives the minion rush, so, it can rush itself, or if you just recently played another mech, you can just play that mech and then Ziliax attached, magnetized to it, then you can rush right away. But if you had the mech from the previous turn, you can attack your opponent in the face. So Ziliax kind of charge in a way if you have some kind of mech board presence from the previous turn, which is probably not that hard to do because this seems to be a minion-based mechanic and there's probably going to be quite a lot of mechs. So if you're playing Zoo, is it really that hard to get a minion on the board? No. So it's probably along those lines. Yes, it has Rush, but Rush is the least bit on the card. Now, the interesting stuff that we learned from the video that Blizzard made is that the magnetic mechanic is kind of like a choose between two effects type of effect. So, if you play a magnetic card to the left of a mech, it will magnetize to that mech. If you play it to the right of the mech, it will be a standalone card. So every time you're using a magnetic mech, you can choose whether you want to beef out your guy already in play, or you can choose to go wide. You can choose to do a separate effect, which is, when the rush effect suddenly becomes very relevant on Ziliax. So that's kind of the idea, and these kind of abilities are very strong, as you can imagine. If you have 6 attack guy in play and use Ziliax on top of it, that's like gain 9 life. That's gain Divine Shield. It's putting taunt on an already fairly sizable minion, I imagine. And it has the lifesteal already, so you're going to gain life a second time when you're attacked back. The impact of this card is really, really high. It's one of those win conditions in the magnetic mech decks. And yeah, I don't know what those are going to be like exactly, but I can't imagine we have the new mechanic of the expansion and we have a whole series assembled mechs, let's say, and then none of that is any good. I doubt it. I think Blizzard has taken some special care to make sure that the power level of these decks are going to be relevant against what we're currently playing. So expect some pretty powerful stuff is what I'm saying. Next up, we have a warrior magnetic mech. Now, it's important to know that in the same video, they mentioned that while there are going to be a decent amount of magnetic cards, a decent amount of mechs in the neutral side of the Boomsday Project, the main classes that are receiving additional class mechs are going to be Warrior, Hunter, and I think it was Paladin. So we'll have to see what that's like. It's kind of like the goons are getting the mechs this time around. But the Warrior one here, it is a very interesting one. I think it's kind of bad, but there's certainly a case to be made for this card in specific metagames. So I imagine a deck that's based off of minions and minion synergy to be generally playing a Zoo type of deck. So if you're playing a Zoo type of deck, a card that costs 7 mana is really expensive. 7 mana is when you want to basically put a nail in the coffin and just end the game at that point. You want some, unbelievably powerful 7 mana cards if you're playing them in a zoo deck. So is this an unbelievably powerful card? Yeah, it can be. It certainly can be. Giving the can't be targeted by spells or hero powers effect to an already strong mech, or maybe a high attack, low health mech, is going to, put a game-ending threat on the board. But it needs to do that. You need to have an attacking game-ending threat, or maybe if you have like a huge taunt minion, you put this on it and you have a huge taunt that can't be targeted with a massive amount of health. That's a game-ending defensive threat, perhaps. So it has to basically be on that stage, because if it's not standalone, it is extremely poor. From what we've seen out of the mechs, standalone, so this is without the magnetic effect. So if you're just playing this as a straight 7 mana, 3/8 can't be targeted. While 8 health is a lot, it doesn't have any other effects. And 3 attack is not really a big threat. So this is a really bad standalone card, but if the mech tribal type works out, if it works out in particular in warriors, and a lot of people rely on hard removal to get rid of stuff, and while this is obviously anti-hard removal, maybe it's the only one. Maybe a lot of people are playing mid-range cards, maybe a lot of people are playing late-game cards, and this is the only exception to that. So this is kind of like a potentially meta-breaking deck, a meta-breaking card, but we don't know what the meta will be like. So it's probably not going to be that. So it's probably not a particularly strong card, but it might be. And it's certainly one of those cards that you want to go back and watch out for, because it does have that meta-breaking effect. Now, also, what needs to be considered is, even though the card itself can't be targeted, even though the mech that you might magnetize on top of can't be targeted, there's still ways to remove cards like that. There's minion-based effects, there's like Big Game Hunter, there's Peacekeepers, there's Equalities, there's Twisting Nethers, and the list goes on and on. There's a lot of ways to remove cards like that. So again, it's going to have to live in a fairly narrow spot in the meta, but it's possible. It could be one of the best cards. Now, speaking of one of the best cards, we have Upgradable Frame Bot. So it's a 2 mana 1/5, not what you would consider one of the best cards in the set, would you? No. Some people gave their criticism to this card as Druid has a 2 mana 1/5 with Taunt that can also become a 2 mana 1/2 with Poisonous. So that flexibility is probably way better than the mech side of things, right? Well, maybe not. 2 mana 1/5 is certainly a very good stat line. If you're playing a zoo type deck, that's good enough, I would say. But really, you have to consider the impact of the magnetics. So if you give this like +2/+2, it's suddenly an incredibly powerful threat on the board. So anything that magnetizes on this is just ridiculous. And again, we have a whole new mechanic. We have a whole set of new tribal mech cards coming back. I think Blizzard has taken special care to make sure that the power level is in line with what we're playing right now. And if it is, and I imagine that it is, this has to be one of the core cards. It's just one of the best cards for its mana cost to magnetize onto. So you can imagine that you will see a lot of these cards when you're playing in the upcoming Boomsday Project. And lastly, from the mechs, we have War Gear. It's a 5 mana 5/5. Good enough stats for Arena. For Constructed, it has to do a little more than that. Now, with Constructed just, being focused around synergy, it might just be good enough. So again, if you're playing mechs, if you're playing magnetics, you're probably playing some kind of zoo deck. Now, 5 mana is not a lot for a zoo deck, but you can't have too many cards that cost 5 mana. And you typically want cards that can do face damage, that can do bursts, that can potentially end the game for you. And this can do that because it has magnetic and it has 5 attacks. So if you have a mech in play and you're playing this on top of it, it's basically +5/+5. It's like charge damage in a way. So that's actually very good. And if you can fill your decks with mechs, and it's a very easy condition to satisfy, I imagine this card will be in some of those decks. The idea is it's slightly better than Blessing of Kings. I kind of like a 5 mana 5/5 buff than a 4 mana 4/4 buff, and some aggressive Paladin decks have played Blessing of Kings in the past. However, the downside of Blessing of Kings is sometimes you don't have a minion. Now with War Gear, you have a minion, because it is itself a minion. So that flexibility is a bonus, and I think this card could actually see some play despite not looking particularly impressive, understandably. Then we had two cards that are outside of the mech themes. This is the 2-mana 2/2 Shaman Elemental. I do not particularly like cards like this one. I actually hope that the Shaman Elemental thing is kind of dead, because I don't really want to deal with this card. This card, in my opinion, is a good example of cards that are... at least I don't like. Let's just keep it that way. I don't like cards like these because I think it's just too powerful and it's too random. So it's 2-mana 2/2. It's a strong stat line. Shaman focuses on buffing stuff. So just any kind of decent body that, you know, either has really good stats or generates more bodies is going to be worth it. So this card just auto-include in anything that needs kind of elemental synergy, or if you just want to zoo your opponent down. So it's a really high power level card. Now, the add a random elemental to your hand is literally anything. It can be Pyros, it can be Geddon, it can just be anything. Any class elemental. So the range of that is huge, because you can get some 1-mana 1/2 piece of garbage, or you can get a game-ending huge elemental, right? So that's crazy. You know, the range of RNG on this card is 1 to 10. It's huge. It's full range. Full range RNG, but the average result of this card is really good. So you're going to play this. If there ever was a 2-mana 2/3 elemental, which is pretty good for tribal decks and all that, you'd never play that card over this one, because the average RNG result is still very good. So you're forced to play RNG cards, and you're forced to be at the mercy of their RNG. I don't like that in Hearthstone, but sure, it can be some fun. I like RNG cards in Hearthstone, but I like RNG cards that are not auto-include. I like RNG cards that their average result is at least around or slightly less than the consistent alternative to those cards. Now, with that in mind, I do kind of like the next card. Stargazer Luna is the Mage Legendary card. 3-mana 2/4, fairly low stats. The effect is very interesting. So after you play the rightmost card in your hand, you draw a card. And that seems pretty cool, right? Well, a bit of a downside is the rightmost card in your hand is always the draw. So whatever card you just drew, if you play that, you draw another card. Yeah. So the main issue with this card is it's kind of high RNG, but the power level I don't think is that particularly high on average. A 3-mana 2/4 that might draw you just one card, in my opinion, is just good. It's not like game-breaking good, just good. So it's probably just a pretty good card. Now, the part that, like, I already know this will happen. I'm going to play Arena. I'm going to play against a mage. Dude's going to have like 2 cards left, and I'm going to be like outside of Pyroblast range. I'm going to be laughing it up. I'm going to be broing it out with my chat, as I always do. And this guy's going to have Stargazer Luna into like a combination of, you know, 3 arcane missiles and 2 frost bolts, and I'm just going to lose my mind. I know that's going to happen. It's very, very unlikely, almost borderline impossible, but it's going to happen. And for some strange reason, I have a good feeling it's going to happen against me. So yeah, I do not await that moment very much, but it is cool card design, and I think it's fairly well balanced, so should be pretty fun. Let me know what you think, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.